Our project today is going to be a simple segmented bowl. It's been more than a year since I've turned the segmented bowl, and I thought I would start with just this basic one, and it doesn't get much more basic than this, I can tell you. You can see from the shape here, it's just about a 6-inch diameter bowl. Pretty simple shape. The bottom is a solid disc, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 rings on top of that. On the right hand side here I have all my calculation. Like I said, it was probably overkill on this first one that I did. I made this one in March of 2011, so it's been a couple of years. I made a bunch of notes and stuff on it that I refer back to when I make additional bowls. So the segment width on these things is way wider than it needs to be, but when I was doing the first one I wasn't quite sure what the heck I was doing, so I figured, well, I'll better be safe than sorry and make it a little bit wider than it needed to be. This was the first one that I actually made. It was off this plan. It's just made out of plywood. It was some 3/4 inch oak plywood, and I at the time didn't know exactly what I was doing, so I said rather than waste some good wood, I'll just make it out of some scrap plywood. So I keep it around as a reminder of the first one I did. We're not going to make this one out of plywood. We have a fairly nice piece of maple here. It's probably hard to see, but I've jointed one edge of it. It's about a little over 3/4 of an inch thick. We should be able to get everything we need out of this one piece of wood for this project, so it shouldn't be too difficult. So once I get going into this, I'll take some additional video, and hopefully you get a little bit of idea how I do these segmented bowls. Okay, this is a setup that I use to cut my segments. That's a sled that I built for the table saw a couple of years ago. I use this Wixie digital protractor to set the distance between this fence here and the blade. It gives me the angle that we wanted, as I showed on the previous clip. This stop on this side sets the length of the segment, which you move based on how big the ring is and how long that the segment needs to be. The stop holds it down. The idea is that you push it through the sled, and then you cut off your segment, and then you take the stop out, and then away you go. You cut as many of them as you need. I apologize for any background noise you might hear in this video. It's a beautiful day here today, probably in the 70s. In the neighborhood, kids decide to come out and play some basketball and have a good time. So if you hear any background noise, that's what it's all about. Here we go. We got our first ring dry fitted together. No matter how I try to get a perfect ring off the table saw, there's always some misalignment in my sled or my saw or something that keeps it from being exactly perfect, so I use this half ring method. I put a dowel between the two halves, glue half together at a time. You can see I use hose clamps to hold everything together. Then once those halves are dry, we clean up that joint between the two halves and then glue it together for a perfect ring. This one's not glued yet. It's a real mess when you're gluing them up. When they come off of the sled, the segments have a lot of like fuzzies on them. I don't know if you can see them or not, but there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up, so it just requires a little bit of hand sanding is all. I have all my rings here. I have the second ring and then the third one and the fourth one there. I'll clean those up with a little bit of hand sanding, and then we'll glue them up, and then we'll be back when I get ready to join the two halves together. We have our half rings glued together as I described earlier. We got ring number 1, 2, number 3, number 4. Really not much left to do now except let the glue dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. We need to do something about truing these joints up between the two halves here so that we can glue them together into a nice tight ring. So I'll show you how I do that in the next piece of this video. Okay, I'm almost embarrassed to say how bad these half rings came out. I wasn't even close. I don't have a disc sander, and I should have spent more time adjusting my sled, which I didn't do. So I have this big gap here in the thing on both sides. It's going to be very, we can fix it, but it's certainly not the right way to do it. And if this was anything other than this simple little bowl that I'm basically using for practice, I would have been more careful about what I was doing. But what I did do, and normal way I handle these, is I take a couple of pieces of 1/4-inch plywood. This happened to be some oak plywood that was laying around the shop. The pieces are a little bit wider than the half rings, and they're a little bit longer than the half ring, and they're a little bit wider than the half ring. What we're going to do is we're going to take these half rings, and we're going to I got a center line on this piece here. What we're going to do is we're going to take and put these on here, and we'll line it up, and we're going to glue that on there. And then what we'll do is we'll use this straight edge of this piece of plywood, actually this straight edge for this piece of plywood, hold it against the fence on the table saw, and we'll trim these bottoms here until we get it to be flush. And then we do that, it's going to, two halves will actually go together and fit tight. The bad news is that I do change the shape of this last segment here. It will make the inside a little bit more oval or not round. The outside, if I don't trim any of it off, will be all right. But it does change the shape of those this segment, this one, and the one on the other side when you're putting them together. I've already glued the first ring to the plywood. I just used some spring clamps to hold it on there. It's not a perfect way of doing it. Certainly if you paid more attention to the setup and had a disc sander, which I said I don't have, you could have trued up the segments before glue them together, and the goal is always to have a perfectly fitting ring, which I'm embarrassed to say didn't work out. I wasn't even close, but we'll see. We can salvage this, and we'll make it into a bowl yet. Okay, I've trimmed all the rings up on the table saw. The important thing is to just take a little bit off at a time, and however much you take off of one, take the same amount off of the other. It takes a few passes to get through, but when you do, you can get them so that they fit. And if you remember how bad it was before, it's amazing that they actually even come together. I got this one clamped up. I don't have any glue on it yet, but you can see the gap joint was right here between these two, and it's cleaned up. Although the ring is no longer round, it's more of an oval shape than it is round. It's all right because we have a lot of wood to this bowl, and we can clean it up. Lesson learned for my next project, which is going to be a little bit more complicated than this bowl, is to check, and then recheck my setting on my sled before I commit to the wood for the project. So I got a couple more things to do to this, and then we'll glue them up and leave them for the night. And tomorrow we'll start putting them on a lathe. Okay, the last thing to do today is get these things set up to be turned tomorrow. What I do is after I glue them together, I mark a center punch where the two lines come together. Sometimes they don't line up perfectly, but it gives you a pretty close center. Then the next thing I do is I drill a 1/4-inch hole, which is the size of the screw on my screw chuck. And then after that, what I do is I take and I glue in a disc, plywood. This has happened to be just a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. I glue it in there, and since I'm not big on I don't have a clamp really to hold it, I just put in a couple of pocket screws and actually clamp it down there while the glue dries. So what I do tomorrow then is I take the thing to the drill press, and we'll use our original hole that we drilled, the 1/4-inch hole, to drill all the way through that, and that'll give us a way to mount the ring onto the lathe. So I'm going to finish gluing these last pieces up here, and we'll let them cook overnight, and tomorrow hopefully we can get something on the lathe and start turning. Our glue is dried overnight, and this morning I took the pocket screws out of the center disc that I had used to basically clamp it on there. I used the hole in the back that we drilled yesterday to drill through the plywood disc that we glued on. I'm going to take these discs and I'm going to run them through my drum sander. I realize it's not something everyone has, and you can certainly put these on the lathe and true up that face, which is what I did before I got this thing about a year ago. I will say, since I got it, it's something I use on every project, and one of those pieces of equipment you wonder how you actually got along without it before you had one. So if you get a chance, it's a pretty wise investment, in my opinion anyway. We're going to take and run these things through there. It's going to be a little bit noisy, so we'll probably won't have a chance to speak much, but we'll show it on the video anyway. You can see just one pass through the drum sander, cleaned that side up pretty well. I'll make a couple actually. I think I have 100 grit paper on the drum. And that's pretty much what that is. Okay, we have our bottom of our bowl attached to a waste block. This is the bottom. It's a piece of maple that I glued on a week or so ago, so it should be nice and dry. This is just a piece of, I don't know, some kind of scrap wood that we're using as a waste block to attach our bowl to. So that's scrap, so it'll get, most of it get turned away. So when I glued it on, I used the center and tailstock, and it left a little dimple there. So what we need to do is clean this up. Like I said, this is thicker than it needs to be, but rather start with something thick, then we can turn it down to the size that we want. So let's get set up, and we'll clean up that bottom and go from there. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make this thing round. I'm going to use this bowl gouge and clean out the outside edge of this. Okay, we got that nice and round. Let's take a parting tool now and we'll clean up the face of this. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to clean up the face of this this bottom disc here. I've touched it up a little bit, and I spared you some of the sand that I'll need to do on it. What I like to do is take my pencil and make some marks on the bottom so I know what needs to be removed, and kind of give me a gauge of the progress. I got the lathe turned way down, so let's see this process. So we take it in. Put some lines on there, that way we can tell where it is that we're sanding. I use my banjo here. I like to prop my sanding board on that, so let's see how we do here. You can see the lines are going away, and because I had sand on this a little bit before, it was pretty much flat. So that's pretty much how I do that. I have to do that with every ring before they're glued together so they're nice and flat. It's not something that I'll show on every show for every ring because it just kind of is what it is. So I use 100 grit paper attached to that board, and it seems to do fine. So that's that process. So this disc now is ready to have the first ring glued onto it. Okay, we're ready to work on disc number 1. I've taken the bandsaw, I've trimmed off the excess plywood around the outside edges of all the rings. It really didn't serve any purpose and makes it easier for us to get rid of what's on there. What I do is I have on here mounted a screw chuck. I think this one was from Penn State Industries. It's got a 1/4 inch screw there in the center, and what you do is just screw this on here like this, and it gets nice and tight on there. And this is where, if you don't have a drum sander, what I would do is I would put these on here like this, and then I would true up this face using either the parting tool or bowl gouge, a scraper. Follow it up with the sanding block, like I showed earlier, just to clean that all up and get that nice and flat. We have a nice flat piece now. We can put our ruler across there, and while you can't see it, I can, and that part's nice and flat. So that's what we want. That's what we want for all of our rings so that they fit together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my disc back on, and then we're going to glue this first ring to the bottom disc, and then we'll kind of go from there.